Hello and welcome to the Undercut Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Thiemo Daily, and we are back to review the 15th race of the Formula One 2024 season, which is, of course, the Dutch Grand Prix. To do this, I am joined by the one and only Mr. Jesse Billington. How are you?
I'm doing all right, actually. A little bit tired, but I finally dried out. I spent 3 days at Silverstone this weekend, where it was all four seasons in 3 days, which was quite the feat. But plenty of classic racing, and I was joined by our co-host Ellie-May. She was there. She was trackside as well, taking photographs, and we enjoyed Busted on the Saturday night, the live music. But yeah, flat out 3 days. And I think we're both flagging a bit. Hence the reason why she's not here, because she also then had like a 3-hour train ride back home beyond on top of that. So it seemed a little harsh to try and corral her into a podcast for a Grand Prix that the two of us didn't really watch. I only got a chance to watch it back today. So I've brushed up. She hasn't had a chance, which is fair. How are you?
4 seasons in one day is pretty much kind of. Yeah, if I had $1 for every time I heard that this weekend, I wouldn't necessarily have a lot of money, but I have more money than I would expect to have, because that seemed to be the theme at Zandvoort as well, across just both F1 Academy and Formula One.
You'd have enough
So
money for some
it's
stroop waffles. I think that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I probably would, to be fair. So yeah, I'll agree with that, and we can segue as smoothly as we can, I suppose, from that into the news, which is a little bit more interesting this week. I feel like, in the sense that we can start off with Jack Doohan being promoted to Formula One with Alpine, which is finally driver news. I feel like I can get excited about, because he is someone who has been on the sidelines a bit too long for my liking. He's been the reserve driver for Alpine since the start of last year and has participated in 6 FP1 sessions to date. Finished P2 in Formula 3 in 2021 and finished P3 in F2 last year, and is going to become the 19th Australian Formula One driver and will potentially be the third Aussie on the grid in 2025 alongside Piastri and Ricciardo, which leads me to ask you, Mr. Jesse Billington, I'm going to test your history here without Googling. When was the last time we had 3 Australian drivers on the F1 grid?
1985 US Grand Prix. It would have been John Watson and two others. I can't remember the other two.
Is that a really confident Hail Mary, or do you actually think that's the correct answer?
I'd like to think that's the correct answer. I don't know how far I am off being correct.
I mean, wrong decade, but apart
Was
from
I
that, still wrong.
1975? Was one of them at least John Watson?
No, not according to my research here, which
Oh,
I'm now starting to question a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead because find out. But according to
I
the
could have
sources I
sworn
went
it
to,
was.
now I believe lied to me, which it was trying to find three at once. There was
Ah,
Jack
no.
driving Frank Gardner and Paul Hawkins in 1965, and you had Tim Schenken, David Walker, and Bernd Schuppen in 1972.
Oh, because I wasn't thinking. I was thinking of completely the wrong person. I was thinking of 1976 US Grand Prix, which was Warwick Brown, Alan Jones, and Larry Perkins. Don't know quite how I ended up with Alan Jones with completely the wrong drivers, but there we go. 1976 US Grand Prix was the last time with
There you
three
go.
Australians in a Grand Prix. But oh well, clearly none of
We
us got
both learned
the
something
facts
there
right.
anyway, because I didn't see. I think I was just because you had these overlaps with some drivers, because you had some of these others coming in for like 2 or 3 races, and then it got a little bit flustered there. But
Hmm.
it's been a while either way. So since the 70s, we haven't had
Yes.
three Aussies on the grid, which I quite like that we're getting that. It seems ridiculous that we've had what Webber, Piastri, and Ricciardo in like the last 20 years and barely anyone else really.
Hmm.
It's kind of like not having any Italians on the grid, but yet that might get fixed next year as well.
Well, it's getting fixed certainly at the Italian Grand Prix with Kimi Antonelli doing an
Mm.
FP1 session. But yeah, if we get Lawson in there as well, that will mean we've got four drivers from the arse end of the globe representing.
That is how they like to be referred to. Yes,
I think the formal phrase is Antipodean, I believe, but
I think
um,
it's just called Australia, New Zealand, to be honest. But
yeah, yeah, regardless, like four drivers from that neck of the woods, all at the top flight of motorsports in single seaters at least, is quite impressive. More still when you include things like IndyCar, where you've got a bunch more Australian and Kiwi drivers too.
hmm
What's in the water down
in
there that makes them
less
quick?
sharks, I suppose
Yeah,
you'd have to be quick. Sharks and crocodiles, you have to be
that's
quick
why
in the
they're always
water
good at
to get
swimming.
away from it.
If you've seen
There you
how good
go.
the Australians are at the Olympics when it comes to swimming. Anyway, speaking of sharks, or rather financial
Let's say
sharks,
less happy
legal
news.
sharks. Yeah, I was trying to find a sort of shark-based link to that one. Couldn't think of one. Haas nearly
Noted.
couldn't leave the Netherlands due to a legal squabble with Uralkali. So you'll remember back to 2022, where of course they had Nikita Mazepin signed as one of their drivers, and he brought with him the very reputable sponsor of Uralkali, and start of the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine obviously led to a variety of legal sanctions. Uralkali and Nikita Mazepin were both dropped from the team. The net result was, however, that somehow Haas managed to cling on to the money that Uralkali had given them, which they clearly didn't spend on much because they were quite unsuccessful for a bit.
Kind of
But
hope they didn't spend on much considering the results.
yeah, you'd hope they hadn't spent it at all, really, because of ill-gotten gains. But anyway, the fact of the matter is, Uralkali poked their head out of the sand and went, "Oi, can we have our money back? Because obviously you didn't run the car with our name on it, and we gave you money to do that." So they demanded their money back through the courts and threatened to strip the team of assets to the value requested. Don't quite know what the number was, but this would have included things like the Formula One cars, motorhomes, tools, basically anything that they could get sort of asset holders on their hands on. The team paid up, but were still stuck in the Netherlands, unable to leave until the payment actually cleared into the Saudi bank account that had been requested by the Mazepins. So it was sort of a bit touch and go through the weekend. Everything was paid up, and then of course they were like, "Ah, we haven't got the money yet." And we go, "Well, it's left our account." Eventually the legal teams left, and they were allowed to leave the paddock at 3 p.m. today. So that's Monday.
Do you think
Because
it was one of those cases of, when your bank asks you, do you want to pay now or later? Because sometimes if people insist you pay now, it might be a scam. You think they might do it in a couple of days. Just to annoy them a little bit.
yeah, sort of like a slow burn thing to it. That, or I don't know, maybe they had a bank holiday thing, or the banks just don't work on a weekend. I don't know. Either way, it seems that Haas and the interesting dodgy dealings that team always seems to be embroiled with are the gift that very much keeps on giving. But they're on their way to the Italian Grand Prix now. They've been left with their cars and their toolboxes and all their important things they actually need to be a race team. They paid
And
up.
their kneecaps in place.
Yeah, this will this have been um Ayuka Matsu's first tricky phone call to Gene Haas asking for money?
Potentially, yes. Because he's had an all right time with it otherwise, I
Yeah,
think.
he's had a pretty
Aside from
decent
justifying
season.
Ocon.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see how that one pans out in due course. That might be their second worst decision ever after signing Nikita Mazepin, but we'll see. The other
Well, it's me
breaking
thinking I was
news.
going to be harsh there.
Yeah. The other breaking news just before we went on air is there's potentially going to be a rookie sprint race planned for after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix as part of the junior testing sort of calendar. And I mean, this is something we've wanted for a while, which is a junior driver sprint race, but we've wanted it in the season.
So
Um,
it's yes and no. I can't think what the analogy is I want to make, but it just seems like here's what we presented you with, and you keep just finding alternative versions that are somehow worse, even though like they're still maybe all right, but it's like just take the idea, like just replace the sprint race with either the F2 and F3 format that you've got, or put the rookies in like we just said, but do it in season. What is the point in doing it post Abu Dhabi when I guess no consequences, I suppose, but it just seems odd. I mean, we'll have more information about it as we come across it, but it just seems again of like close but no cigar.
yeah, it's a bit of an odd one. It's sort of here's a great idea, half-heartedly executed. You're looking, oh, it could
Yet
have been
again.
something. Yeah. But anyway, it's
Uh,
on the cards.
so
It's
it's a
something
lot
that
of
might
Formula One
happen.
stuff at the moment. It's kind of reminds me of Audi are joining, but they're taking over a team like close no cigar. Andretti want to join. No, like, all these little kind of nearly got something really good going on, and then you just tarnish it slightly.
Yeah, it's always going to
Before we
be.
get into the Grand Prix itself, though, it is worth pointing out that Robert Schwartzman took part in an FP1 session for Kick Sauber this weekend and didn't do terribly. It's been a while since he's been in the car. He finished in P16, and I just felt like it was worth mentioning as
I
we
was going
haven't
to say
seen him in a car for a while.
I did spot him there across the weekend, but weirdly enough, I spotted him saying well done to
Out of the
Carrie
car.
Schreiner after F1 Academy. That was the only time
Makes
because I
sense.
hadn't been watching the practice race sessions because I'd been circuit side. But I did watch back the F1 Academy, and I was like, that's Robert Schwartzman. So that was like, what's he doing there? And obviously, I'd completely missed he'd done an FP1 seat, but there we go. Um, so anyway, we might as well jump into the Grand Prix, and of course, this is the first race in the last seven to have been won by the pole sitter, which is quite surprising further still, considering it was Lando Norris going into this. But he did all
Yes,
right.
especially considering lap one, turn one as well,
Yes,
which
lap one,
is a
turn
great
one.
tradition that just keeps on going now.
But I mean, he's sort of broken the duck of that at least. Finished 22.8 seconds ahead of Max, the biggest 1-2 gap all season. I believe it's the next biggest gap to find it is about 22.5 seconds if you go all the way back to Singapore or possibly somewhere else. I think I might be right in Singapore, possibly wrong, but it's the biggest
Not
gap of
last
this
year.
season at least, not last year. Where would it been? Maybe it was Bahrain or something. I think it was Bahrain at the
So
start
probably
of this
Bahrain
year.
of this year then.
Yeah.
Bahrain or Saudi, I'd imagine.
Regardless, it's also the first McLaren win from pole since Lewis did it in 2012 at the Italian Grand Prix, also in a car numbered 4. Weirdly enough, this is before drivers got to pick their own numbers. You're simply given your finishing position in the previous year's championship. So, it's funny how life repeats. And also, this is McLaren's first win at Zandvoort since 1985, which was also Niki Lauda's last win and the last Dutch Grand Prix until he returned in 2020. So, it's a fun race for statistics like that if you're into that sort of thing.
Very much so, and I feel like before we get into team by team analysis, the only other real high of the Grand Prix for me, you feel free to jump in if there was anything else that stood out to you, but was on lap 41 where Albon, Gasly, Alonso, and Stroll just pretty much swarmed past Magnussen, who hadn't hit yet, coming out of the final corner, going down to T1 and T2. And you could see that Albon was getting close, but he didn't quite realise, because of the timing tower, how close the rest of them were until they cut to it. And, oh, Jesus Christ, poor Magnussen. Just bam, 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 all of them at once. And you just go, I really hope he's not pit or that there isn't anything wrong with the car because that seems just very cool. And then when you got to see that back in the cool down room at the end of the Grand Prix when Charles, Max, and Lando were all watching it, they go, ooh, like, yes, that was all very much us.
But equally, here's the thing: they said in the commentary it was like, oh, it's like the Indy 500. And you're sort of going,
Mm,
I don't
not
know. I've
really.
watched the Indy
Yes.
500. That's usually sort of a few more cars wide and also a big accident. But yeah, I don't know, mixed feelings as to the commentary on that one. But it was interesting to see F1 finally sort of have that crazy moment of like 4 or 5 cars packed together. I'll take my wins where I can get them.
Sorry, mixed commentary from Sky F1. That's unheard of.
Yeah. Our thoughts on the Sky F1 commentary team are sort of Thiemo's thoughts on the Sky F1 commentary team are purely respective of his thoughts,
Don't
not
don't
mine.
try and hide from that. You are right there with me. Anyway,
So,
Red Bull, we're going to launch straight into them before you can try and deny it any further. An interesting Grand Prix for them. Bit of damage limitation, I guess, considering that the result overall wasn't terrible, but it does reveal more chinks in the once dominant armor. Verstappen P2, Perez P6. And you want some fun statistics here? Perez took his first top six finish since Miami. So that shows you how well he's been doing lately.
ooh, that's
hmm And yet somehow that is enough to do what he needs to do, apparently, for the time being.
oh, that is
Thoughts?
a that is a ooh, that is not a fun statistic.
Can say it was fun. Well, it depends on your perspective, I suppose. It's not fun if you're Paris.
Might be funny for Liam Lawson. I don't know. It's that's oh
Did you
yeah.
have any other thoughts on Red Bull?
I don't know. I hadn't had a chance to really write much down on Red Bull. I think it is, like
Not
you
much
said,
to
a
say,
damage
really.
limitation one. It was a good performance from Max, but I think ultimately we're starting to see a car that's becoming more and more recalcitrant to try and deal with as they sort of try and sort of get to the absolute razor edge of what that car can do and potentially have pushed the car beyond what it's capable of. And that's why we're seeing this sort of split between what the drivers are able to get from it. And that's why we're seeing sort of the split performance from Verstappen and Perez. I think that's possibly the point we're reaching. But otherwise, it was just sort of a I don't want to say we've sort of reached the apex of what Red Bull can do because I feel they might get a second wind. But it's
I feel
interesting
like
to
with
see them
Red Bull and
struggling.
Verstappen in particular, it's going to be mirroring what Palou is capable of doing at the moment in IndyCar, where the constructors is very much up for grabs. I still think that game is firmly on, but Verstappen here, yeah, the lead in the championship was shortened ever so slightly, but he was still P2 on a bad day. Yes, it might have been by 20 seconds, but he was still P2. He still gets those points. And that's what Paulo's been doing for a while now. He's not necessarily been winning everything, but he has been there. It matters where you finish when you're not first. And if it can still be in that top five, and particularly in the top three, then you don't need to win another race this year. In theory, you just need to keep banging in those P2s and P3s. And if Lando has a DNF or doesn't win or has a bad result, and you don't necessarily still need to win the race, you just need to be in that second or third spot.
It,
And that's why I think the championship is still his to lose. And I
mm,
just think that it might get close, but I don't think Norris is going to be able to get it.
I think it's going to be an exciting second half of the season because Max can still win it and he can still have won it by having not won sort of a race since when did he last win a race? Like sort of Spain?
Spain, yeah.
Yeah. So he could get away with winning the championship by having not won since Spain because all he's got to do is remain consistent, just keep knocking in
It's a
podiums.
little bit like Jenson Button in 2009. I think he didn't win a race
Really
after
strong
like the
opener.
halfway point, but he then just managed to keep it consistent. And it didn't matter that it was a small margin because you don't really care at that point because you're world champion.
Yeah. And equally, the problem Norris has is Norris isn't just fighting Verstappen. He's still got his own teammate to
Hmm.
contend with. At the right circuit, he's got the Mercedes to contend with. The Ferraris are sometimes up there too. So there's a lot for Norris to try and overcome to overhaul Max. I think Red Bull, yeah, neither is really sewn up for Red Bull, but they've got
One is
close
more
with the
certain than the
drivers.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we'll move on then to Ferrari, which is sort of a topsy turvy weekend for them, really.
Yeah, poor qualifying, but unlike yesteryear, didn't let this stop them from moving forward substantially in the race, which was quite a nice thing to see. Leclerc finishing in P3 and surprise podium for him as much as it was for us, and Sainz managing to get all the way up to P5. And yeah, Leclerc just took the opportunities that came his way, and Sainz was another driver that maximised damage limitation. It was just a really solid, smooth drive, and Leclerc's drive to P3 while keeping Piastri behind him for so long at such a close gap was quite impressive. And we questioned a few times earlier in the year if Ferrari were keeping the right driver next year. But he keeps putting out these underrated drives at the moment. I think that kind of fly under the radar because of what else is going on in the Grand Prix, and this was one of them.
It was, yeah, like you said, poor qualifying from Ferrari. And I don't want to overegg this too much, but I think Ferrari did some thinking and homework over the summer break, and it showed this weekend a really solid set of strategies recovering from their somewhat subpar qualifying. And it's what we want to see. We want to see the team sort of figuring things out and putting things right and moving forwards and developing properly, not just developing the car, but developing themselves and sort of getting a tone to how they need to perform to be rivals to Mercedes, to Red Bull, to McLaren, and more so these days to McLaren, because we're so used to benchmarking against Mercedes and Red Bull. But all of a sudden, we've got to reframe that, rephrase that, and go, hang on. But yeah, I think what they're able to do, if they're able to keep this up, keep up this renewed sort of form of competence, early days, I appreciate that it should be enough to keep clear of Mercedes and the constructors. And I think that would be a really good turnaround for them to come home P3 this year. When you look at the battle that McLaren and Red Bull have had and stormed off into the distance, if Ferrari can say they've consistently held on to P3, that will be pretty good.
And it's not out of the realm possibility yet either that, as unlikely as it might be, that they could get the constructors or P2. They are not too far behind, generally speaking.
Mm.
I don't think it's going to happen, but it's just they've kind of got this nothing to lose and everything to gain mentality here because, and I'm going to make another IndyCar comparison, Joseph Newgarden, he knows he's out of contention for the championship realistically, but he can just come in and he's just determined to win races, and Ferrari can just do that and do whatever the hell they want. And it's like, oh, has that messed you up? Oh, that's a shame. We don't really care because we're doing what we want to do for us, and we want to try and get P2 or P1 if we can. Because if you can take it to Red Bull, McLaren, then so can we.
A huge part of
In
it
a similar,
also pivots on what Perez does as well, because all they need is
yeah.
their two drivers to just keep out finishing Perez. And that helps put
Mhm.
them that bit closer to Red Bull each time. And it just helps start eating out the
The
margins if
fact that Sainz
McLaren
finished
overhaul
ahead
them.
of Perez this weekend says a lot, considering where he
Yeah.
started.
Yeah.
Um, Mercedes, though, like Ferrari, had one hand tied behind their back in qualifying. Just slim margins, I think it was, and conditions and everything else. But for me, I don't know if you had the chance to see this or not, but Hamilton got a penalty following qualifying for supposedly impeding Perez, which I thought was quite unnecessary because at that point of the track, where else is he supposed to go? He can't stop the car. He
It's a
can't.
phenomenally narrow
It's
circuit.
just a really awkward part of the track at best of times. But I thought that was a bit harsh. Not as harsh as the Albon thing, but I understand that, even though it frustrates me. So that was a bit unnecessary. And the race pace itself was a bit of a mystery, especially for Russell. But another team with somewhat damage limitation here as well. And Russell finishing P7 and then Hamilton P8. Russell probably just quite happy that he managed to finish a spot ahead of Hamilton, even though he started in P4. The strategy didn't work too well for him, but it was an excellent recovery drive for Lewis, who had an extra set of tyres to play with. And yeah, not where he would have wanted to be, but again, considering where he started and all the rest of it, not as bad as it could have been.
Yeah, I think both drivers had a weekend that's very much a case of sort of similar with Red Bull. It was damage limitation for the both of them. Hamilton having a fantastic
We
recovery drive.
promise this isn't the case for every team this weekend that we're
No,
going to talk about.
there's a
Some
bit
teams
of
did just do
overlap.
good or bad.
There's a bit of overlap, and also Thiemo and I are sort of in this weird habit at the moment of agreeing with each other, which is more dangerous than anything.
It won't last, I'm sure.
If we'll find something to butt heads over. But yeah, I think Russell, the car wasn't really with them. They were chewing through tyres. So I think the two-stop strategy ended up putting both their drivers roughly in the same part of the field, regardless of pace. And yeah, it was just such an interesting one to watch from that regard. But Hamilton's recovery drive, you didn't really see a great deal of it on the telly, but it was there and it was good. It was most overtakes or most positions gained across the race of any of the drivers out there. I think Albon and Sainz shared the second place for that
Yeah.
one. Yeah. So again, when you look at it numerically like that, it's quite interesting. And the race pace, like, yeah, it's a bit of a mystery. I don't know where it's gone compared to what they were to at Spa, but that is a vastly different circuit. Zandvoort is a tricky one to approach because of how narrow it is, how tight it is, and you've got to get a car that loads up its tires in a very unique way to cope with the banking. And you look at the way that Indy cars are set up to deal with ovals, the way they have weight shifters to move weight around the car to balance it going through a turn that isn't exactly flat. F1 cars do not have that. And you've got two turns that are essentially what clockwise and one that's anti-clockwise. You don't really get that in any other series with that level of banking, and it just loads the cars weird. And as a result, it just becomes quite a tricky one to manage on tires, which is why I anticipated seeing teams doing three stoppers when we laid out our predictions. I figured it might be an optimistic one, it might be a bit wild, but it's a bit of a strange circuit for that. And then seeing Mercedes pull a two stopper, essentially running all three compounds of tyres in a bid to try and find one that was good. They never found the Goldilocks compound, which was interesting this weekend.
Yeah. One team that we can say actually did well consistently across the board, though,
Yeah.
is McLaren. Obviously, Norris winning the race and Piastri coming home in P4. And this was a proper victory for me for Norris after Miami. Miami was one of these ones where, yeah, it was a long time coming, you could argue, and it was nice to break the Ducks back, but it felt like it wasn't the statement that him and McLaren wanted to be, whereas this was. It wasn't just winning by a couple of seconds. It wasn't benefiting from a safety car late in the Grand Prix. This was overtaking a three-time world champion purely on pace, purely on skill, and then starting off the road and getting like good solid 22 plus seconds over him. And he's the first driver other than Verstappen since Leclerc in Australia in 2022 to win by more than 10 seconds, if you want another fun stat there. So it was very much the drive he needed for me, and I think this is one of the things where, as much as we can slag people off every 5 seconds on this podcast, when someone does a good job and they do a proper good job, credit where credit's due, I will take my proverbial cap off to them. That all being said, I don't know if you saw this, but Norris's team radio earlier on the race, where his engineer asked him, "Who do you think you're racing?" did not inspire confidence, and while it did ultimately go quite well in the Grand Prix, shows that there's still work to be done there. Piastri as well, decent race for him. Another case of close but no cigar, but again, second season for him, going up against the likes of Leclerc or Norris and Verstappen. I think he's fine.
I think it was an interesting question to ask, and I think it was. I actually
Just
haven't
felt a
figured
bit odd
out
because it's like you should know. You're the guy with more information than driver who's just trying to get on with driving.
going fast. Yeah, I haven't figured out quite what the question was trying to intend, whether it was sort of a who do you think you're racing, back off, don't burn through your tires, or who do you want to be racing and we will put in a tire strategy that will get you there. But equally, that's a dumb question
But
because
again, you should
obviously
have done that before.
you should have done that before. And also, you ask any racing driver, who do you think you're racing? It's always going to be the guy ahead of you. You always want
Hmm.
to be chasing down the guy
Doesn't matter.
ahead of
You're
you.
not. It doesn't have to be realistic. You're just going to be wanting to go for the car in front of me.
Yeah, so that was an odd question, but overall, I think it's all coming together now for the Woking outfit, and I'm relishing it. I'm genuinely enjoying watching this team come together a little bit more and more each week, and with a little bit more polish on it, they'll be a proper threat and a target for other teams to aim for if those teams aren't already aiming for them. If they're thinking far enough down the road, they will be looking at what Zach Brown and Andrea Stella have done with that team and going, that's where we need to be, and we need to be there very soon because otherwise we're going to be left behind. And both drivers properly on it. Communication between the drivers and the teams is good. The stops are solid. The pace is there. The car setup is doing all right. And on a weekend where car setup really defined how your weekend went, it stood out that both McLarens were pretty quick. I don't think Piastri was quite up there. He's not been a great one for sort of tyre management, and we're still seeing him learn. This is only his second season in the sport, and at a circuit where tyre management is again a bit of a strange art to get hold of because of the quirks of the circuit. This was sort of a good one to see him perform still relatively solidly at coming home. What P4 is not no mean feat.
So that being said about tire degradation with him though, he is clearly getting much better with communication, and you could see potential for a repeat of the Norris team radio from earlier on the Grand Prix that I mentioned with Piastri when they asked him later on, kind of in a somewhat quizzical sense of they're trying to figure out, do you want to box again or not for fresher tyres? And he just goes, they're not perfect, but they'll make it to the end. And he's just, I think Brundle called him an engineer's dream because he's so just direct and factual that it doesn't present any kind of an issue there. It's no case of fumbling or umming and ahhing that appears to be on the engineer's side of it, ironically, of the two. It should be the other way around if it's going to be. But he was able to manage those tyres well and shows that he's learning. While it might not be perfect there yet, and while he might have cooked them a bit too soon to try and get past Leclerc, it shows that he still managed to retain P4 and keep Perez and Sainz at bay behind him, which is really encouraging to see. And again, he's a contender, but he's a rear gunner at the moment, and he is doing exactly what he needs to be doing to live up to that role, similar to what Perez did in 21. Not quite to the same extent yet, obviously, but there's potential for that next year if things keep going the way they are.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting when we see that step move forwards, and when Piastri does get to that level, he's able to act as that rear gunner for Norris. Quite how ferociously competent the team's able to be when all of a sudden it's got two drivers that are all the time up there. And yeah, I think he knows what he needs to work on. There's no point in us chastising him for it. And equally, I think he'll be his own biggest critic. I think he went on record saying he sort of called it disappointing, but I mean, you're coming home.
I love that he's disappointed with P4, you know?
Yeah, I also really enjoy the fact that he's going, no, I should have been on the podium. I should have been challenging for a win up there. And if that's where he thinks he should be, and if that's where McLaren are sort of backing him and pushing him to be, more of that, please and thank you. Opposite side of things, as opposed to sort of chastising yourself overly harshly for a bad weekend, we get to Aston Martin.
Yeah, they just put themselves in one of their best positions of the year and then have absolutely fumbled it, in my opinion. Poor race after a qualifying high. They got passed by some drivers that shouldn't really have been able to. It felt like Stroll got a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane because of course he did. And you end up in this position where Stroll finishes in P13, Alonso P10, and they get 1 point for their Herculean efforts on Saturday, and it just seemed a bit of a waste of one opportunity that was given to them. I know that nothing really happened in the race for them to be able to capitalize more, but at the same time, you're not a team that doesn't know what it's doing. You're throwing checkbook after checkbook at this problem. I would have thought that you'd have been able to at least just sacrifice Stroll, for example, and just see what you can do to propel Alonso a bit further afield than just P10. Especially when you've got an Alpine in front of you, you know. It just shows that the extent of their woes at the moment. It was a bit of a shame for me on that one because it could have been not a podium. That's probably asking a bit too much, even if I did predict that elsewhere, because that would have been nice to see with Alonso. But you know, deserve better than P10, I think, for the effort that was put in there.
Yeah, just looking at their points haul, like they are a huge way off of Mercedes. Like you sort of go, oh, it's all right.
They're in their own kind of area.
They're in fifth place, and then you go, Yeah, but they're on 74 points. Mercedes are on 276. They're 202 points ahead of you. Like you're not fighting Mercedes. And it only takes Minardi to have like a couple of decent weekends and they might hunt you down. Admittedly, Minardi are on 34, so admittedly they're still a fair way off. But even then, like you Aston Martin are just sort of sat on their haunches going, yeah, P5 will take that. I'm like, I don't want that from you as a team. I want you to be trying something new and doing something better. And yeah, decent quality, drop down the order like a stone. And so many other like so many other teams. The problem is the fight in the middle at the moment is a big battle, and there's a lot of teams constantly getting closer and closer and feeding into that pack. You look at what Albon's able to do on a circuit where the Williams is hooked up with the right tires. You look at the
Hmm.
Haas where you've got Magnussen able to sort of push Hulkenberg through the order. You've got the Alpines at the right weekend able to have a decent time of things. The Alpha Tauri is able to do much the same. And then you've got Aston Martin tumbling down into that. You sort of go, well, one of you is coming out on top, one of you isn't. And the rest of you are possibly joining stake. So it's it's such a tight battle, and unfortunately, they haven't got the finesse or the ability to actually do anything in it. They're being left behind by the likes of those other teams, and I don't think it will show by the end of the year. They were lucky they had a solid opener, but it it will be a good year if you look at it statistically. But if you read the history books and you read the race reports, it will tell a very different story. And
It's a
multi-car
little bit
wide,
um, it's saying when if you've won a championship by a few points, it's or lost it by a few points, it's kind of going, yeah, you won it, but look at all these ways you fumbled it that made it that close. It's kind of yeah, did you win it, or did everyone else help you win it, and you kind of just did your own thing, and it kind of helped mask the mistakes that you made?
yeah, it's a mixed thing, and it's so tricky to get a proper read on, and you have to pay attention to each race to really know where someone's season went wrong. And I think for Aston
Luckily, we do,
Martin's,
and if you've missed any Grand Prix this year, go back and listen to our race reviews on the Undercut podcast.
yeah, go back, do that, give it a like, give it a subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming ones either. But speaking of the midfield, of course, we might as well turn our attentions to Minardi, where we've both written very short sentences.
Yeah, it was a bit of an odd one because Snowder outqualified Ricardo, but then, much like Aston Martin, Snowder just sunk like a stone during the race. I'm not really sure what happened there. Poor race, and Ricardo had a bit of a quiet one, and he got close to the points again and kind of maximized what the car was capable of, it felt like. And was kind of hoping that Stroll's penalty would, or he would be able to stick close to Stroll to get closer to the couple of cars ahead of him so that um, by the time the penalty came into effect, he could kind of maybe get into that P10 spot, but just kind of ran out of laps, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, a bit of an odd one, kind of as expected, but also disappointing. I'm not sure. It's a curious one.
Mm. I mean, it looked like it could have been a better
Pretty much,
weekend
yeah.
for Ricardo. I think there was more on the table from him, but at the same time, he sort of Sonoda 17th. That was my biggest disappointment from
Hmm.
Minardi was I really wanted more from him. And as the sort
So
of
you think if Ricardo's finishing P12 from where he started, then from where Yuki started, he should be then in the points going off what we've seen from him from the start of the season. So for that to then be completely the opposite of what he does is, like you say, just a bit of a head scratcher.
yeah, Yuki's got an average finishing position at the moment of 12.2. So to come home 17th is properly underwhelming for him. Ricardo finishing 12th is about on par for a guy with an average of 11.8 finishes. So it's, yeah, it just,
So you think he is Hulkenberg?
I don't know. It's just, I wanted more from both of them. And again, it's that dilemma of having a really fantastic midfield, but then all of a sudden the drivers you want to see doing well aren't numerically doing well when it comes to actually getting in the points. And again, much the same with Williams. This is the problem where we've got this fantastic midfield, but when you actually analyze Williams, a lot better than it looks.
This so this went better than people will give it credit for. Albon finishing P14, Sargent P16, despite the race result that is a strong weekend for me for them, full of promise with the upgrades they brought. Albon did a really solid job across the entire weekend from the word go. And okay, yes, Sargent had a massive crash at turn four in FP3, bringing out the red flag and missed qualifying. But amusingly, he still finished in P12 ahead of Albon in that practice session, and also managed to then get up to P16, which for him is good. We've got to kind of measure it like that, unfortunately. Um, and frustrating to get disqualified by what was it, mere millimeters
Decimals of a
of a
millimeter
flaw,
was
decimals of a
what
millimeter.
James Vowles said.
Um,
They literally took the edge off of it with some
yeah,
400 grit
that
paper,
was
and it passed. So that
mm,
must have been frustrating.
very, very frustrating. But I think it shows that, and we saw what ultimately that's not going to make too much difference. I don't think so. We saw what that car was capable of. Like I say, when L1 gets hooked up on a track where that car suits it, it's good, and there could have been points available for him today. Well, yesterday, sorry. Um, and I don't know. I'm just quietly confident one. They're gonna get more points between now and the end of the season. I think in 2 or 3 races. I'm not gonna say which. I have no idea, but it just feels like that there is something there.
Yeah, there's steps being made forwards with them. And again, when you're a team working on so much of your car and your weekend performance and your organization, your structure all at once, it's easy to just lose sight of those really fine details. So I'll sort of give them benefit of the doubt with that one. And I think I'd seen them trying to pull off that bold one stop, stopping really early and just hoping to leave Alex to run the hards all the way through. But again, it was just that sort of misinterpretation of quite how aggressive the track was going to be to those hards. And he made some great progress on them, but then I think they left him out a little bit too late and they lost a few of the gains he had made on them.
Mm.
But it was a great run still and great performance from him. And I think it was good of Logan to get back in the car, get back out there, and he didn't have a horrid drive. Again, finishing, I think he finished ahead of both stakes, which is
Oh yeah,
admittedly
easy.
not
Finished ahead of
particularly
Yuki.
finished ahead of Yuki. So I'll give him that credit where it's due. But again, if there are rumours about Mick Schumacher replacing him for the rest of the season are
I've
true,
heard
it's
Lawson
I would prefer Lawson. I've also heard Lawson, but Mick is hardly the driver you bring in to get on top of your crash damage bill.
a little harsh, but I can understand your point.
Yeah, I mean, look at the Haas bank account during the Schumacher years and argue me the
I
toss.
mean, arguably, the point toss there is probably more in his favour, but all right. Um, but we'll move on then because we're going to have a very short section here on stake because, dear Lord, there's another woeful Grand Prix for them, 19th and 20th. Their streak of not getting any points this season continues, and I genuinely don't know what. Like, they need
God,
Budapest
Jesus.
21 on speed to get points at this rate.
I don't know what they need. They are allergic to points at this moment in time, and I really want them at this moment to actually come home with no points because something needs to wake them up to do better. And apparently, coming last and second to last every week in is not
Isn't
enough.
enough
Yeah, I need the
somehow.
season to hurry up and end. And someone goes, "Congratulations, we found the biggest wooden spoon on the planet. We've put your name on it. Go do better,
I'm not
or
going
go
to whack
be
you
Andretti."
around the
Yeah,
head with it now.
like uh, how can a team be this bad,
Hmm.
but also be so earnest in it as well, sort of so nonchalant about the way that they are
Well, this
just
was the thing.
terrible.
At least in 21 with Haas, you knew what the deal was. You know, there was all these circumstances around it, and but then you think you've got two experienced drivers. You've got a Grand Prix winner in there. If anyone should be able to maximize a terrible car, it should be Bottas. And yet, no, not at all.
No,
Um, but never mind. Haas, meanwhile, case of close but no cigar again for me with them. Hulkenberg P11, Magnussen P18, which was a bit unfortunate. Another solid drive by Hulkenberg, maximising what the team I feel was capable of here. Just missing out on points again. P11 just seems to be where he. I don't think he likes it because obviously you prefer P10, but it just seems to be kind of very representative of where Haas is at the moment. Poor Magnussen getting swarmed, as we mentioned,
Mhm.
was entertaining for us. Not so much for him, I imagine. But he'd done all right up to that point of the weekend, kind of. He made it into Q2, and he'd been solidly in the top 10 for both of the first practice sessions, then somehow came P2 because of the mixed conditions and the red flag in FP3. So it was a shame then to come away with a P18 after all that.
Yeah, I think for Hulkenberg or possibly overall for Haas, the issue is the fact that it burns through its tyres at a slightly quicker rate than the rest of the field. And this is why we see sort of they do really well for a good stint and then they'll pit and then they'll do really well on the second stint, but then start to tail off just that little bit too early. The end of the race doesn't come soon enough for them. And that's when we see Hulkenberg go from those sort of P8s, P9s back down to your P10s, your P11s. If they're just able to sort of have a race that's a bit more chaotic, that gives them the chance to make that sort of second pit stop, a chance where they're having to swap between sort of wet and dry compounds, it just gives them that opportunity to fight a bit more. I'm just now questioning sort of what race weekends we have seen Hulkenberg score points at. And sort of, let's see, Hulkenberg, Saudi was a bit, Saudi is a tricky race to try and predict at the best of times. Australia, a bit of a chaotic race, so able to bang points in there. And then Miami, again, in the sprint, weirdly enough, but that was a sort of a choppy race. And then again, you sort of look, and also sprint, you're not having to worry about a pit stop there. So that falls very much into their advantage. Working through.
I think it shows as well that they are
How the hell did he
perfect
get
at
8 points at the
capitalizing on the
British Grand Prix?
opportunities uh,
Was the
through
British
pure
Grand Prix that
skill.
chaotic?
That is how. Apparently, well, yeah, Lewis Hamilton won. We were always focused on that, weren't we?
Oh yeah,
But I think it shows that they are good at positioning themselves for when the chaos comes, when they know that they're maybe not going to be able to do anything on merit, and it just unfortunately translates into P11s.
yeah. They're in the right place, but the fortune thereafter just never comes at the right time. Yeah,
It's close
Jesus.
but no cigar.
Austrian and British Grand Prix, he finished sixth. Christ
There you
on a
go.
bike. Well, but there we go. Again, Austrian Grand Prix a little bit chaotic. We saw different winners. British Grand Prix again
Big
a little
front
bit
advantage.
chaotic.
Yep.
So yeah, this is the Haas plan. This is the Haas to plan. But
And it's
unfortunately,
working
we just
on
need
the
a bit
most
more
part.
chaos. Yeah, mind you, we've got the Italian Grand Prix, the Azerbaijani Grand Prix, and Singapore coming up. Three Grand Prix that can sometimes throw a spanner in the works. We might have my
To be
theory
fair,
proven
I think
correct.
all the Grand Prix that we've got left this season, the only two where I'm not expecting kind of madness is Mexico and Abu Dhabi. Everywhere else, you pretty much get something interesting most of the time. So who knows?
We could be on for some more Hulkenberg points. Hoints. Can I coin that as a phrase? Hoints doesn't sound as bad as Stoints.
Whatever else you're thinking.
It was Stoints that I tried to
Um,
coin, wasn't it?
oh,
For
yes,
stake
yes.
points, wasn't it?
I just don't think you should be in charge of coining anything.
This is why they don't
It's
let me
not
make the
going well.
dictionary. Alpine,
One of the reasons. Yeah, much better weekend for Gasly than perhaps anyone, including Gasly, was expecting. 2 points, T9. Lovely stuff. You want that for him. One didn't really do much. He kind of came 15th. And in that kind of classic way of, as soon as you announce you're leaving, you suddenly start doing badly, which is always quite amusing. Um, yeah, they'll be happy with that, I think. Not much else to say, really.
he overtakes Behrman in the standings now because he was previously tied with Behrman because Behrman
It
technically
does
outranked
amuse
him
me
by having
that
a P7. Yeah,
Bottas is 21st in out of the 20 drivers that have competed, and Behrman's ahead of him on one Grand Prix, and you think, yeah, maybe it's time you went somewhere else, mate.
time went somewhere else, or just sort of had a word with the team and said, "How much does this car weigh? Like, is it just is that what it is? I don't know." But yeah, Alpine, my heart breaks for Ocon. I mean,
Why?
I like him. That's the only reason why. I don't know. I think that must be why I wrote that down. But Gasly having a wild time with things. Brilliant scrap into T1 with Albon. That midfield is manic,
Hmm.
and I love it. And he is very much thriving in that midfield that's developing into quite a scrappy and frenetic place. And given how much time he spent driving for Toro Rosso, RB, Minardi, what else were they called? Alpha Tauri was also what it was called when he was there. So he's used to that scrappy midfield, and now the Alpine is just about getting into that sort of realm of fighting. He's coming back to the fore, and I think it's also going to be great having the car exercise like that is going to help them develop it and move it forwards. And while they've also got the great talent of Jack Doohan doing that for the moment, it's going to put them in a great place. And also, Jack's going to be joining into a car that he theoretically knows
But he's on
inside
the up
and
as
out.
well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a car that's on the up and a car he knows well. So it's promising for what they've got coming up next year. And I think this is a good sign and also a great sign if you're Dylan stood there on the sidelines going, okay, it will do points. I'm happy. I can work with this. And yeah, you know where you're going with it. So it's a bit of a winner for him, which leads us nicely into our winners and spinners.
Yeah, which for me this week, I'm going to stick with Williams because despite the Grand Prix results, as I said, their upgrade work, I think, is the crucial thing there. And that was evident all weekend with Albon. And I've got my fingers crossed for Monza. Decent drive on Sunday for Sargent. You've got to try and be nice to him where you can. And I'm glad that regardless of if Sargent stays for the rest of the season or if someone else jumps in that car, either way, Sainz is there next year. This is a positive sign for him that he made the right call, and it's a positive sign for us because we've obviously waited a long time for McLaren to get their socks up to speed, but we've waited even longer in some respects for Williams to do this consistently for decent periods of time. And I would very much like that to come sooner rather than later now, especially if we can get this. I know I'm really putting a lot on this upgrade, but also it's just nice to have something good to say about Williams.
Yeah, I think it's things are turning around for them. They're turning around slowly. It's not the sort of snap change we sort of saw from McLaren in the sort of Norris Science days, where all of a sudden we're like, oh, the car's quite quick all of a sudden. It's a bit
Mm.
slower with Williams. It's getting there piece by piece, but I think that's also because they've got so much to try and overcome from an incredibly dated factory and old processes that have sort of been fast outpaced by the development of all the rest of the cars. Like there's so much they're trying to overcome, and I think they've done a fantastic job of doing that. But again, like you said, it's a great sign for science moving there, because when you look at what were his other options, what go to Haas, which is sort of a case of that can blow hot and cold from sort of hour to hour, let alone season to season. Audi,
Still better than steak.
yeah, which have yet to score a point, and Red Bull, which had sort of turned their back on him anyway and didn't really want him because they don't want someone that's going to challenge Verstappen, but at the same time they need someone better than Perez, and unfortunately, Sainz is a bit too close to the challenge Verstappen line rather than sort of better than Perez. So yeah, but anyway, my winner, Norris. I think it's a bit of an obvious one, but surely this now has to start putting a lot of the doubters to bed. It was a fantastic drive from him. And yeah, we saw
What
the
we need more
usual
of.
turn one sort of whoop, he's not even leading out of turn one. It was a
Did it.
really metered drive on the way out of it. Everyone thought the undercut was going to be the way to go on that race, and he made the overcut work on Verstappen. They covered him off pretty soon after he pulled it, but he made it work. And if you can make the overcut as a pit strategy work against Max Verstappen, you're doing something all right. I think is the baseline you can work off there. I'd also like to chuck in an honourable mention to Ferrari for being competent, which is rare, but I feel they've done it and therefore they've earned it.
Talking of incompetence, though, our spinners for the weekend, I'll kick this off with Aston Martin because they qualified P6 and P8, goddammit, and they had better performance all weekend than they had most of the season. They only managed to get 1 point out of it with Alonso in P10. It frustrates me. It frustrates Alonso, I am sure. Stroll, who knows? But it frustrates me a lot because you saw what they could do last year. They were on the podium here last year. Ah, oh. Who's your spinner?
My spinner is RB. I just feel like there was a lot left on the table and they clearly got the setup wrong and they just couldn't
So when you
generate
say
the speed
RB,
needed.
Red Bull or Minardi,
The Minardi one, Toro
right?
Rosso, that one.
Because you can see how I think this could have been
Easily
put.
misconstrued. Although, yeah, there was a bit of pace missing from that Red Bull, but the RB, the one with Sonoda and Ricardo in it, um, they just couldn't generate the speed needed around the circuit this weekend, and that was really emphasised by the heating up scrap of the midfield. The fact that that fight is getting so ferocious, and when you're not on the ball with it, it leaves you behind. And unfortunately, we then see what we saw with certainly Sonoda being sort of left far behind and overtaken by Sargent as well. So yeah, not great spinners for that reason, I think.
We'll move on to our predictions review though, and about as well as it usually goes. I feel like in some respects, 1 point for Ellie-May for Orlando Norris pole. I surprised myself here and got a point for Verstappen finishing P2. Not what I thought I'd get. Not that I ever think I'm going to get points for any of my predictions, but this definitely took me by surprise. 0 points for fastest lap and 0 points for wild predictions. So unfortunate weekend for you, but again, you were a bit too ambitious with your Alpine predictions. So I
Ambitious
think
but
this is
rubbish.
karma.
Yeah,
Yes.
teach me.
Fantasy F1 wise, however, for them, we had some interesting result there, with Follow Trackside Hub 3 in first place with 245 points. And then, I'm guessing this is a relation, Follow Trackside Hub in second place with 242 points. And then Trabant Formula 1 with 240 points. You did well in Zandvoort for mid-beds racing anyway, with P4. Just to compare, Carlos was in P9, Team Nitro RX was in P11, and Extra Magnifico Terrestri was in P37. Unfortunate for them. Overall, however, Take a Stroll still leads with 3,111 points. What's the Racing Point? Not terribly far behind with 3,051 points. And Noah Honga 3 in third with 3,023 points. Meanwhile, Mid-Bed Racing is in P12, just 10 points ahead now on the Kerbs in P11. I've overtaken one of your other teams, though, so that's one of you out of the way.
That's a threat.
Ellie-May's podcast team is in P20, and naturally, the Greatest Moustache brings up the rear in P37. So we're battling hard now, Mr. Billington, for, okay, we're not the top 10 just yet, but we might get there by the end of the season if we don't take too many points out of each other and forget about the rest of them.
Yeah, there's a good scrap forming, and I like that. I like that we're having a good little tussle there. Yeah, this is getting good. This is getting exciting.
Any final thoughts on the Zandvoort Grand Prix before we wrap this episode? Other than, I'm glad I've been taking my Las Vegas mentality into every Grand Prix this year, and I didn't like I told you when in the preview that I was looking forward to this weekend, but I'm glad I didn't let that feeling run away, considering the Grand Prix that we had.
I'm glad I didn't spend time watching it live and instead chose to like talk with friends and be at a live event and watch racing actually on track and take photos of that. Yeah, it was a good race to sort of catch up on while editing photographs. So I think that potentially speaks volumes for it. And I know Ellie-May will probably share the same sentiment. Speaking of, Ellie-May and I were doing a little podcast tomorrow evening, so that'll be out shortly afterwards, about the Silverstone Festival, all the classic racing and the goodies that we saw there. So that will be coming out in due course. But yeah, otherwise, I think overall for the race, it's another one crossed off the season.
Yes, very much. I think if the season started with Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, and we thought, oh dear, here we go again. The second half of the season felt like it started off in the same way, which hopefully means that if we condense that down, we're going to have quite an interesting last 5 or 6 races when we get there. Hopefully, we can still have the other 9 be quite interesting as well. But, I think that may be the mirror that I'm hoping is being held up here.
Yeah.
But that is all we've got time for on this week's episode. In the meantime, Mr. Billington, where can the people find you if they'd like a bit more of you?
I can be found all across social media at Jesse on Cars on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and the like. My latest batch of photographs are up on Instagram with all the racing action in the wet, the wind, the sun from Silverstone. And of course, you can find Writing for Classic Car Weekly. We've got, by the time you listen to this, you should still pick up our latest issue, which will have what's this one got in it? Possibly preview for the Silverstone Grand Prix. It's also got me road testing a Works Alloy MGB. If not, pick up the one after that, which has got a preview for the Goodwood Revival in it and lots of other goodie bits inside too. So yeah, just pick up print media, please. I love it. Thiemo, yourself.
Myself, yes, you can find me everywhere through my Instagram, essentially t.albert.data on the Kerbs, where there's a bit of everything in motorsport these days, quite frankly. And IndyCar season is wrapping up soon, so we are very busy with that. We just had the Portland Grand Prix, which was one of the quieter races of the year, but still somehow infinitely more interesting than Zandvoort. So there will be a review of that Grand Prix coming out later this week, so do go and find that when it comes out. And that's about it. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with a preview for the Italian Grand Prix in short order. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. Do make sure you've liked, subscribed, and got notifications turned on for all of that. Thank you very much for listening again, and we'll see you again soon.